Dr. Kennedy Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just reflecting on the comments made in the second reading as opposed to the first reading, and starting with the remarks by the Minister commencing the second reading, and let me take the opportunity to pay tribute to the Minister. I think her tenure in office is offering a whole new positive approach to climate policy in New Zealand, and I think we can all be hopeful that we can build more of a national consensus, the kind that exists with scope for disagreement, respectful disagreement that exists in Europe. And I'm very hopeful that we can develop that as the months go by. But the Minister, from my recall, commencing the second reading, made two fundamental points. I just want to comment and critique them. The first was that, and it is there in the explanatory note, that the reason for the switch to the 1 for 2 back in 2009 was essentially in response to the GFC and a protective maternal concern for business in New Zealand, which we all share. And then again, essentially extenuated in 2011 because things hadn't quite recovered sufficiently. I suggest in response that that was a missed opportunity on the part of the government to seize the moment for a real conscious, cohesive effort, national effort at a transformational pathway to a low-carbon economy. And that was missed because the protective action of calibrating that surrender obligation in a way that the business people made it clear they feel comfortable with, by definition, meant that they weren't going to change. And you might have wished to modify it a little bit, but you did need to keep it in store such that the business community would move along the transition that Grant Robertson and James Shaw and others have mentioned. And I don't hear the words much, transformational pathway. I don't hear the words just transition coming from national colleagues. And I invite them seriously to start using those words so that we can start sharing in the framing of a future national climate policy. And I would love to see a cross-party dialogue informally in advance of the implementation, no doubt, of the treaty examination of the Paris Amendment, the Paris Agreement, that allows for both a just and effective transition in the next few years. Her second point was, as she put it, about identity. And it was about identity of New Zealand and the way in which individuals, we as ministers and MPs and citizens, identify with the land. And of course we all share that, no question about that. But I would toss it back and say that in caring about our land, we're going to have to just recognise the magnitude and urgency of the climate crisis. Because if we go back to 1992, it was regarded as a major problem coming down the track, but not a crisis. Well, that's a quarter of a century ago when the Framework Convention established that. The Principal Act of 2002 is already 14 years old. And the Paris Agreement reflects a qualitative change in the nature of the crisis. It is now upon us. It is a global crisis. New Zealand is not immune from it. And we have to identify, and I will be putting forward an SOP which tries to link the traditional Framework Convention obligations that inspires in the explanatory note the removal of the 1 for 2 and links it to the 2002 Principal Act and the 92 Framework Convention to Paris and basically modernises it, and let us do that on a cross-party basis as well. My final point is that I just, to reiterate, I still am not sure that our colleagues across the aisle here just recognise the magnitude of the problem. The current pledges relate to guarantee 2.7 degree to 3 degree. That is teetering between dangerous and catastrophic climate change. And if the best we can do tonight is these pragmatic, principled baby steps to catastrophic climate change, then we can flag it away. But I don't think that that is in the intent of the Minister or her government or her colleagues. And so I put out the challenge to our national colleagues to work with opposition members, Labour, Green, New Zealand First, on a cross-party basis to develop a consensus in the future.